Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the queen of crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and I'm so excited about the interview that I'm about to bring you that I don't want to waste much time in a preamble. Here's a spoiler warning for you. Lord Edgware dies, is spoiled over the course of this conversation. And that's really it. Let's barrel forward to my fantastic conversation with a fantastic mystery author. Here goes. Ragnar Jónasson is the award-winning Icelandic author of a whole bunch of mystery titles, including the internationally best-selling Hulda series, the Dark Iceland series, and several standalone works. At this point, he has sold 5 million copies of his work across 36 territories. One of his novels, The Darkness, was adapted into a 6-episode television series starring Lena Olin and directed by Lasse Hallström. The Sunday Times has said of his work, "Is this the best crime writer in the world today?" Which is a pretty excellent question to be posed to an author, especially since I'm pretty sure that is meant to be taken rhetorically. His books have been on bestseller lists across Europe and the USA, and he has won oh so many prizes. Also, and I want to highlight this for all of you listeners, so take note here. We will get back to this very shortly. Ragnar has translated 14 of Agatha Christie's novels into Icelandic, which he started doing at the age of 17. If that is not a teenager devoted to the works of Agatha Christie, I'm not sure what is. He also has a law degree. He has taught copyright law at Reykjavik University, and he is the co-founder and co-chair of the literary festival Iceland Noir, which is held annually in Reykjavik, where he makes his home. His latest novel, which we will be speaking about today, is The Mysterious Case of the Missing Crime Writer, and this is a sequel to Death at the Sanatorium, with at least one more book to go in this particular series. We have so much to discuss. Welcome to the podcast, Ragnar. I'm really thrilled to have you.
Thank you. So happy to be with you.
So, The Mysterious Case of the Missing Crime Writer is obviously such an Agatha Christie-ish title on at least 2 different levels. And it's very different from the terse, more noir-flavored titles that you tend to favor, The Darkness, The Island, Whiteout, Snowblind, etc. But it's pretty obvious to me that Agatha Christie is important to all your works, and we don't need to analyze your titles for proof of that. I just mentioned that you translated 14 of Christie's novels into Icelandic starting when you were 17, which means you must have quite the Agatha Christie origin story. I'd love if you could tell us how you first came to Agatha Christie and what she came to mean to you.
Yes, my first experience of Agatha Christie was actually through television, and I'm probably was around 11 or 12 when I saw a rarely seen TV movie called Seven Dials Mystery.
Sure.
On national television in Iceland, and I had no idea who Christie was at that time, but I loved that film, and I haven't watched it since. But in my memory, it's a fantastic way of telling this story, and it had, of course, it has a great twist at the end. And when I came to the end of this film, I remember thinking, who did this? How can anyone be so clever? And I need to know more about this person. And then I think it's not long after my best friend and cousin in Iceland called Guðjón was reading a lot of books, including Christie's books, and he basically told me, I would have to read Christie, and I think he recommended some books to start with, and so I picked up my first Christie probably at the library around the age of 12. That was Evil Under the Sun. And I just, fell in love with the writing, with the twists, the stories, right from the start, and just kept reading. I read everything I could find. I bought books, but most of them were out of print in Icelandic. I went to secondhand bookshops, tried to find some of them, and went to all the libraries I could find, and just read through every single Christie I could get my hands on in Icelandic. And when I ran out, the only option I had was the National Library in Reykjavik, which has 1 or 2 copies of every book published in Iceland. And the only way I could read them was to go with my father, because he was actually, I think, 16-year-old age limit to takeout books because these are rare books. And so I went with my father on Saturday mornings when I was off school. And we sat there, every Saturday morning for many months. He was doing some research, and I was just reading Agatha Christie in all Icelandic translations. And these are wonderful memories. And in the end, I read everything I could find. And the only way to continue after that was just to read English. And so Christie was, again, the first book I read in English.
Oh, that's so interesting. So there were a number of Christies that were already translated into Icelandic. Those are the ones that, like, when you read Evil Under the Sun, you were reading an Icelandic translation of it?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, there were a number of titles. I mean, the first Christie was translated into Icelandic in 1941, I believe.
Okay.
So fairly close to, while she was still writing, of course, and they kept doing. There was probably, I would say, on average, a book every maybe 2 or 3 years being published. Sometimes it was different publishers, different types of books. Usually, like soft covers, paperbacks, and these are very hard to find today. But they'd done quite a lot of them, more than half, I would say, when I started translating and when I was doing going through these books.
And you translated 14 of them. Obviously, you were choosing the ones that hadn't been translated yet, but was there some sort of a choice going on there? Because I'm also fascinated by that. How did you choose which books you were going to translate?
Yeah, so I started, as you said, I started this at 17, which was in retrospect quite a strange decision from the publisher to trust me with this. But at that time there was this one man in Iceland who was publishing Christie's backlist, a new book every year for Christmas, like a Christie for Christmas, really. And I used to call them like every year to ask, what is there a new book coming? What's the book? Is it, I was just wondering if it's something new that I hadn't read, and usually it was. So it was always a very exciting time for me to see which Christie was coming out in Iceland. And then when I was 17, I had summer of school, of course, and nothing to do really. And I asked my mom to drive me to this publisher, and just went there and met him in person and offered my services as a translator of books. And he knew who I was because I'd been the strange guy who kept calling him every year.
You were the strange kid who wouldn't leave him alone.
so he was very friendly. He said, "I'll call you back," and I thought he wouldn't, but then he did. Like, I think the day after, he called me back and said, "Yeah, let's try this. Let's do this." And I said, "Okay, well, perfect. What book should I do?" And he said, "Just pick any book." And so I went for this first book, I went to my bookshelves in Iceland at home and tried to find the shortest book I could find because I had no idea what I'd sort of gotten myself into. I had no idea if I could actually do this or finish a book. So it was Endless Night was the one I started with. Sort of an unusual title, I think, but a very, very good book.
What an appropriate title for the kinds of books that you would go on to write, which I think have so much Christie in them, but also obviously, you've got this noir flavor, but that one, certainly more than most, also has it. So that makes an odd kind of a sense.
Yeah.
Had you just studied English in school? I mean, were you,
Yes.
That was it? Like there was
that was it, yeah.
Okay.
And grew up watching TV, of course, as any kid does. And in Iceland, different to many European countries, we don't dub television or movies. So everything we watched was just subtitled. So but it was just from reading and from reading books. At that point, I read a lot of books in English already and done some short story translations as well. But it was quite an ambitious undertaking, to be honest.
I'll say, I mean, I kind of love it because though it just shows like your overwhelming love of Christie that you first of all turned to reading the books in English, which like even just that as a teenager, you're like, okay, there's only so many books of hers in Icelandic that exist at this point. So now I'm going to have to read others in English. But then you took it an extra step forward and were like, well, now I want to actually make these available in my native language and be the one to do that at the age of 17. I mean, I've actually talked a little bit on this podcast about the peculiar challenges of translating Christie, since so many of her clues are in the written medium, like in the text itself, which I think is, one of the many things that she does so brilliantly. We have the alternate spelling of a word as a big clue in one book, and then in another, one single letter is ripped off of a word, which changes its meaning entirely. I know you know which books I'm talking about. I will not mention the titles because I don't want to spoil them. I'm assuming that those two were probably already translated, but how did you approach those sorts of challenges? Like, did you ever have that kind of an issue?
Well, interestingly, the one you mentioned where the letter is ripped off is one book I did actually do, and it's a book that I really wanted to do for a long time, but I kept pushing it and postponing it year after year because it had never been done in Icelandic, and it's a great book, and I really wanted to get it out there. But this clue was really stopped me for many years doing this book because I had no idea how to pull this off. And I remember going when I was traveling and in Scandinavia, I was picking up copies of this book in Norwegian, Danish, and trying to find out if anyone had solved this in a language that's similar to Icelandic, but no one really had. So I think in the end, I just gave up and did a footnote. It's the only way to explain this. And so I did the book, and it is one of my favorites of my translations, but basically because it was so hard to do.
That's so, and you know what? I do a little spoiler warnings at the beginning of my episode. So before we even go to the interview, so no one will be angry about this, but I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same book, which is Lord Edgeworth Dies. So yeah. Okay. And now that I've really spoiled it for everyone, just there's a letter that is included in the book in which the S from she is lopped off and turned into he. And that's just been incredibly bedeviling, right, for so many translators, because how do you sometimes it might, there's some cases in which maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but if it doesn't work, there's kind of nothing you can do about it. So
no, it really isn't. It's
yeah,
it is very hard, and there's a lot of challenges in Christie. I mean, especially for a teenager in Iceland before the age of Google, really. So I remember, they were always eating kidneys, like kidney pie, and that was something very strange for me, and I wasn't sure what was happening there. And the characters kept walking out of windows, and it took me a while to figure out a French window is more like a door than a window.
I still struggle with that even sometimes when I'm writing. I'm like, do I call it a French window or a French door? Because sometimes it sounds weird. Both of them sound weird.
Call it a French door for your translators.
Yeah, exactly. Do that from now on. That's really interesting. I'd also, and I promise we will stop talking about the translation of Christie and about your own work in a second, but I'm also just curious because a lot of times we like to delight in this podcast about the translation of the titles themselves, because so many of Christie's titles are so playful and, they're taken from nursery rhymes or they're quotations from Shakespeare or, other sources. And what was your approach when you were translating titles? Did you just try to stick to exactly what the title was, or did you ever do a sort of cultural translation so that it would have the same effect in Icelandic? I'm just curious how you approached.
Yeah, I actually had I had some fun with this. I mean, some of the titles I did Death on the Nile, which was probably the best book I did because it's an iconic book which hadn't been published before, and that was just there was no way to change that title really. And Lord Edgeworth Dies is basically the same. Mm-hmm. I did Five Little Pigs also, which is another one of her best books, obviously, and I call that a memory of murder, which is sort of a reflection on maybe the US title of that book.
Yes, Murder in Retrospect. Yeah.
Yeah. And Take It at the Flood was quite difficult because that's from Shakespeare, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, basically, I sort of played with the word, flood and tides and sort of like that. It was hard to do that properly. And for Endless Night, I probably should have just done a direct translation, but I trying to be original for the first book I did, and so I called it. So the land I live on is called Gypsy's Acre, I think, and I used that as the title of the book in Icelandic.
Got it.
trying to remember if there was. One to buckle my shoe. I did that. I called that tooth for a tooth in Icelandic.
Tooth for a tooth.
Yeah.
Is that a reference to
it's
like
basically it was just a play on like an eye for an eye thing.
Oh, I see.
There's like this. It has this dentist episode.
Yes, of course. Oh, that's clever. Oh, I like that. That's what I mean. And you kind of do have to be, creative, because I think so many of these titles, she's going for an effect. And if you just do a literal translation of the title, that's not the right thing to do, obviously.
No. Some of them are difficult. They do it with mirrors, and I just called like sort of trickery at play or something, because it's hard to, and I did Mrs. McGinty's Dad, which is a very difficult title. So I changed that completely.
Yeah, because that's a nursery rhyme too, technically.
Yeah, and it's not something that will work in Icelandic. And I did The Body in the Library, and I called that. I should probably have called it The Body in the Library, and it was reissued some years ago, my translation, and then we just did the literal translation. But I called it The Majestic Hotel or something like that, which I think is the hotel from the book.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, A Tooth for a Tooth, that's now officially one of my favorite titles in terms of for One to Buckle My Shoe. So that's really cool. So are they all now translated? Is that why you stopped at 14 or all?
No, they are not. And I did stop because I had just, I think I did one book after I published my first novel, and it was basically a question of time. When I started writing my books, I wanted to try and do one book a year.
Sure.
And there was no way to do both. Right. But I was sorry to leave it, because I love doing it, and not all of them have been done. Even now, even to today, there are quite a few titles that have never been done. So maybe when I have some extra time, stop traveling, or maybe I'll pick up and do some of them. But the one I would have loved to do was Curtain, but that's been done in the meantime by a friend of mine who's done a few since I left this job. And,
okay, so there's some taking up the mantle, because it surprises me. I mean, given that there's such an appetite for mystery, for crime fiction overall, I have to imagine any Christie title in Icelandic is going to be received with interest. So I'm sure it's just a matter of time before.
Yes, yeah, but it's a small market, and and people read English, so that's I think that's the reason why not all of them are in print.
That people are reading in English. Yes. I mean, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I used to do work in foreign rights for comic books more than straightforward novels. And it was because of the dubbing or non-dubbing culture in each country. But like a lot of the Northern European countries, there's just not as much dubbing done, but that means that English tends to be a little bit better known or more widely used. And there seemed to be a lot of kind of cross streaming of like, well, even though I didn't grow up with English as my native language, I have a working knowledge of it. So if I really want to, I can read something in English, or I can watch it in English. And, versus like, I know in France, there's just like a huge dubbing culture where like things just get dubbed all the time.
Yes.
And, so there's not as much of I think, maybe your like average French person might be a little less inclined to read something in English, or just to be as familiar, have that working knowledge of English potentially. I'm just, obviously this is such a broad generalization, but that was interesting to me though, that there is that sort of not bilingual, but just kind of like the ability to go back and forth between one's native language and perhaps English, because of all of those cultural products that came in without dubbing. That's just really interesting to me. So
yeah, it is. And I'm slightly concerned because Icelandic is spoken by only maybe 300,000-400,000 people worldwide, and it's not. It's sort of a slippery slope, because when you stop translating, it has an effect on just the language, and we are. I mean, authors in Iceland are quite concerned that that we need to do more to preserve the language, because the influence of English is very, very strong.
Well, you know what? I'd love to segue into talking about your own material by way of a question having to do with wait for it, translation. Because I couldn't help noticing that your most recent novel, The Mysterious Case of the Missing Writer, which we will discuss, obviously you write in Icelandic. So your novel was translated into English by Victoria Cribb, who I know has translated other books of yours as well. Has she done all of your translations?
No, she has probably about half of them, because I've had two different publishers, and we had a different one for the first series, and then Vicky has done the stuff for Penguin mostly, but and then we're doing using another one for the next one actually. So it's but mostly, I mean, I think she's probably done about half, and she's wonderful, and they've all been very, very good. So I'm very lucky with translators, and I know how important the job is.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm curious about it, how you've handled having your books translated into other languages, and not just English, of course. You're published all over the world. But since you obviously have such an excellent and literary command of English, were you ever... I'm sure you were not ever tempted to actually translate your books yourself, but like, do you find yourself looking over your translator's shoulders and making suggestions, or do you just like leave it entirely alone and let them figure out what to do?
Well, yes. So I was never really tempted to do it, because I think you should translate into your native language. So I've been asked many times, and people have been surprised. Basically, I've gotten that question many times throughout. But always, I would not do that, I think. But I do spend a lot of time with the English translators, because I know the language, because I can hopefully be helpful with some insight. And we do a lot of editing work on the translation as well. So we sometimes explain stuff that isn't explained in the Icelandic version, because it's obviously the Icelandic reader. So we do a little bit of work on it. And sometimes the English translation, or often actually, the English translation is used as a basis for languages further away, where we don't have anyone translating from Icelandic. So it's very important that the English one is good, and it's always been, I think, quite excellent from Bitten, Vicky, and all my translators.
It reads quite excellently to me. So and honestly, that, as someone, I've mentioned this once or twice on the podcast, but when I was a kid and, took my reading very seriously, I took the very odd position that I never wanted to read anything in translation, because it bothered me so much. Just imagining how different it must be, which meant that and really still to this day, I've gotten over that, but I'm not as well read in French and Russian literature, especially because of that. But it's great to hear that you're, involved to some extent with the translation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Into English.
And even if I don't translate, I have been tempted to write in English quite a bit. And most of the short stories I do in recent years have been commissions or for magazines like Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, and so I usually do those just straight to English, because it's easier, and they're being done for an English audience. And I am now doing a Golden Age novella in English that you can probably read Christmas next year, but I won't tell anymore.
Okay. Oh, that's so fantastic. I can't wait to read that and compare and see, what Ragnar Jónasson in English versus in Icelandic translated to English seems like. I'll bet you that I probably won't be able to tell. Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of our episode. We just wanted to take a moment to ask you, our dear listeners, for a favor.
If you haven't already done so, we would very much appreciate it if you take a moment to, give us a rating or a review wherever you're listening to this podcast.
It really helps the podcast out, because ratings and reviews make it much easier for other Christie fans such as yourselves to find our podcast.
And the more ratings and reviews we get, the more people we can reach.
It should take you a matter of seconds, and lucky you, we're going to provide you with those seconds right now, so go to it.
Thank you so much. And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
All right, let's turn to your latest novel now, which, as I mentioned, is the second in a new trilogy that you've been working on. But this trilogy is itself a spin-off of a longer series that you began with The Darkness, which centers on Detective Inspector Hulda Hermannsdottir. That is my best attempt at pronouncing that Icelandic name. Forgive me. And she is played on television by Lena Olin. Hulda actually makes an appearance in the mysterious case of the missing crime writer. And it seems like you enjoy leaving breadcrumbs or Easter eggs, or insert your metaphor of choice here, for little rewards meted out to readers who stick with you and who read across series. And yet these novels don't have to all be read in a certain chronological order. And this strikes me as a very commercially savvy and Christie-ish thing to do. When did you decide that you wanted to do a spin-off series, and how did you land on your lead character in this trilogy, who was a male police inspector named Helgi Reykdal?
So basically, this happened when I'd done the 3 books in the Hulda series. So for the first book in the Hulda series, The Darkness, that book starts off with Hulda being asked to leave. I mean, she's 64, she's about to retire from the police, and she's asked to leave early because there's this hotshot young man who needs her office. And that's all there is to it. And the whole story then goes off with Hulda and her anger at being sent away from her job and her final case. And when I've done these 3 books, this particular chapter came back to me, and I thought, who is this guy who takes her office? Who is this man? Is he a likable guy or not?
Mm-hmm.
If anyone reads the first book in the Hulda series, you don't like the man who takes her office.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'll make him. I'll write a book or a series about him, and I'll make him very likable. And I did that by making him a book lover. So he reads a lot of Golden Age books. His father and later Helgi himself owns a bookstore, a secondhand bookstore, which is based on a real bookstore up north in Iceland. And he sort of spends his time like I do, going through old Golden Age books, old translations. I mean, I don't think I read as much as he does throughout the series. I mean, it's a little bit exaggerated, I think, but that's basically because I want to fit in as many references and as many recommendations as I can. Because if you read one of these books, I hope when you finish the book, you go and read the Golden Age books that I recommend, and that would be the perfect reader for me. Someone who does that.
Absolutely. I love what you do, in spinning off this series. You take this, it's not even really a minor character. I mean, it's a reference, right, in your first series, and then you really center the series on this male police inspector. And it reminded me a little bit, take this as a compliment, of what Tana French does in her Dublin Murder Squad series, where she takes one minor character and then sort of centers the next book on that person. And I just really liked the way that it broadens out the world of these police officers and, the Reykjavik that you're creating. But it's a series that, the one doesn't require the other necessarily. So like you can just completely read this one without having read anything else, and the mystery is self-contained. But if you have that, if you've read The Darkness, you've read all of those books, you'll realize, oh wow, okay, I'm getting I'm getting another angle here. And it just sort of, helps build out that world, but you don't make too much of it. And that's really what Christie, I think, so often did with Poirot and Ariadne Oliver and Colonel Race. And there would be these characters, if you really read through methodically, and, you're one of those freakish Agatha Christie fans, such as we are, you'll pick up on those references and be like, oh yeah, okay, I appreciate that. But it's really there for the fans, and it doesn't necessarily distract from the mystery in each story. So just to set the scene in a non-spoilery way for listeners who haven't yet read The Mysterious Case of the Missing Crime Writer. So we've got Helgi here, our book-loving police officer, and he is tasked with a missing persons case involving a famous crime writer. Her name is Ellen Jónsdóttir, and she has written 10 perfect crime novels in 20 years, and then seemingly just retired. She's been living her life quietly for some time after these books have come out, but one day she seemingly vanishes without a trace, and it's up to Helgi to figure out what the heck is going on. And if the title of this book, as well as that concept of a missing crime writer, made you think about Agatha Christie's own 11-day disappearance, then you are not alone, because Christie's disappearance does get mentioned in this text. And yet, it too is not an overwhelming preoccupation of Helgi's, or I think of yours in this book. I did not get that sense. And I really appreciated that, because I think there's only so much we can draw from the well of Christie's disappearance at this point. And I really did feel that a much more intriguing well that you tapped in this novel, which you've already referenced, is this list of Golden Age detective fiction that our bookish police officer dips into over the course of the novel. So before the novel properly begins, you actually thank none other than Dr. John Curran for his suggestions as to which books Helgi should read over the course of his investigation. So I'm just going to read out this list of books. There are just 5 of them. Peril at End House by, of course, Agatha Christie. The Dragon Murder Case by S.S. Van Dyne. Cecily Disappears, a.k.a. The Wintringham Mystery by Anthony Barclay. A Graveyard to Let by John Dixon Carr. And Brat Farrar by Josephine Tay. So as many of you out there will have picked up on as I read through that list, all of those books deal with missing persons, which is why Helgi uses them to reflect on the missing person situation in this story. I'll be honest with you, Ragnar, it actually took me a second to remember that Peril at End House does feature a missing person. We've got the pilot, Michael Seaton, and the fact that he's gone missing is hugely important to the plot. But I don't think of Peril at End House as a quote unquote missing person crime book. So at first I was like, why is Peril at End House in there? But I thought it was actually very clever to include it in that list. It's a deep cut, and I love a deep cut where any Christie title is concerned. Okay, so I promise I have a question coming up here. I'm curious about this conversation that you had with Dr. Curran. Did you have it while you were still figuring out the plot of the book and you knew that it was going to involve missing persons? Had you read all of these books when he suggested them? Did you reread them before you started writing the book? Just please tell me all about the selection of these mystery titles.
Yeah, so basically, when I did the first book, I thought I'll include some Golden Age titles, because that's sort of the theme of this series and what I love to do. So for the first one, I did Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I did The Dutch Shoe Mystery by Ellery Queen, which is probably one of my favorite Golden Age books of all time. I did, Nio Mars. I did Patrick Quinton, and that was a strange reference, but that was because it's a book called A Puzzle for Fools, and it's I included that because it's in Icelandic. It's one of the very few Golden Age books that is available in Icelandic, so that was more of a random list in the first one. But in the second one, I knew this book would deal with a disappearance. So when I was writing it, and I knew the whole plot, I think at that moment I was reading The Dragon Murder Case by S.S. Van Dyne, which is a very sort of classic disappearance mystery. And this guy jumps into a swimming pool not to reappear. It's very clever. And so I emailed John, and we're very good friends. We've known each other for many, many years. And anytime I have a question about Christie or a comment or whatever, I'll ask him. And so I said, send me some names, some Golden Age books that you like that have disappearance in them. And actually, Brat Farrar is one of my favorites as well. So I had included that. But he sent me the other two, the Anthony Berkeley one and the John Dixon Carr one, which I hadn't read at that point. So these were very good inclusions, and so he is duly thanked in this.
They're all really great books. I recently read and covered Cecily Disappears on the podcast Patreon, and I really enjoyed that one. It has quite a long list of suspects. It's like a very big country house party, but it's a really intriguing disappearance story for sure. It's funny, I have to say my taste completely coincides with Helgi's in the book, because he talks about adoring Josephine Tay and not really loving Carr.
Yes, same as that.
Is that I was hoping. I was like, I hope this is Ragnar's taste also. Yeah. Yeah, what do you write? You write, he'd never got on particularly well with Carr's work, as it was very focused on so-called impossible crimes. Other Golden Age authors tended to appeal to him more. Yes, I feel the same. And it's funny that John didn't even necessarily recommend Josephine Tay, who's not strictly Golden Age. I think I always include her because I just think she's so brilliant, and I love how different each of her books is, and I think they each have some sort of gem of brilliance in them in very different ways. So I love that she gets included here. Do you have a favorite among this list?
from this list, I mean, excluding Christie, which I would always say, but of the other 4 books, I would probably say Josephine Tey. I mean, I really love her books. The Franchise Affair as well is excellent.
Yes.
It's just very, very original books. Not many of them, but she was quite clever. I wish she'd done more.
I wish she had done more as well. And in some ways, I think of her as, the inverse of Christie. I mean, Christie wrote so much, and so often you know what you're going to get in a Christie, even though she obviously surprises you, with her brilliant puzzles. But Josephine Tey didn't write so much, and then every book doesn't necessarily feel like it was written by the same author. Even like that. That's how different they often are, and so she surprises you in a different way. And
yes, he does. And, and one of them was actually done by Hitchcock, as you may know. Young and Innocent was A Shilling for Candles. That's one.
A Shilling for Candles. Got it.
Which turned into Young and Innocent as an early Hitchcock film.
Yeah, no, she's just really, really brilliant. So do you see The Mysterious Case of the Missing Writer as being more of an homage to Christie than your other works? I mean, my sense is that her work is present in everything you do, which I hope you take as the massive compliment that it's meant to be. But I'm curious about, what moved you to write this book, where I think maybe the Christie influence is a little more on the surface than it tends to be in your work.
Yeah. I mean, I think this series is a little bit more Christie than the others, but I think there's always an influence from Christie. Maybe in my first series, the Snowblind and books set up in the north of Iceland, I think those were quite influenced by Christie. Then with The Darkness, those are a little bit more dark. But as we know, I mean, Christie could be very dark, and I think she's always present. I'm always rereading her. So, as you know, I spent a week in Turkey this September.
Yes,
just breathing Christie.
Yes.
Every day,
swimming in Christie.
Basically, yeah, and so she's ever present. But I think this series is a little bit more dedicated to her. And actually, there was a book called Reykjavik that I did with the Prime Minister of Iceland 3 years ago that we dedicated to Christie, because that was there wasn't a golden age mystery in a way, but I think there was a lot of red herrings, and we had a lot of fun with trying to echo Christie a little bit. But no, I think but these 3 books are maybe not just Christie, but these are like love letters to the golden age in a way. And these are the stories I grew up reading. And we have, and in the 3rd book, which comes out next year, we have 5 more golden age titles to recommend. And I can tell you, if you want to know which books those are, then you can maybe try and figure out what the plot is.
I would love to hear, please.
So these are Christiana Brand, and that's, of course, Green for Danger.
Oh, love that one, yes.
Excellent book. And then we have Hercule Poirot's Christmas by Agatha.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Tied Up in Tinsel by Niall Marsh.
Mm-hmm.
We have The Tragedy of Set by Barnaby Ross or Ellery Quay.
Okay.
And finally, we have Dorothy L. Sayers, Whose Body. So that's a decent list.
Okay, that very intriguing list. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think we can use that to try to ferret out exactly what that one's going to be about. But I am really looking forward to that. I think what I love about this trilogy in particular is that you obviously are you're Scandinavian, you're noir, like you're writing in this tradition, but you also obviously love the Golden Age, and you're very, I think, upfront about your love of Christie. And sometimes I think those influences, those Golden Age influences, are not so obvious in the noir tradition, but they're absolutely there. And I think if you ask most authors and you finally drill down to it, they're like, yes, of course. I've read Christie and I love Christie, and those influences are there, and maybe even some of the other Golden Age authors. But it's a connection that I think sometimes, because tonally the Golden Age books and then the noir, in a particular modern day Scandinavian noir, because on the surface, I think in terms of tone, the connections aren't so obvious, I think people dismiss how important the Golden Age still was, even for this contemporary tradition. But I feel like your books really help keep the connection alive, and in particular, this trilogy, which I really appreciated. But it's very dark. I mean, my God, this book ends in a fairly dark place and in a bit of a cliffhanger, and I won't say more about that because I don't want to spoil anything. But you are definitely thinking when you get to the end of this book, okay, I need to see what happens to Helgi,
Yes.
in the third book, and it's not great. Like he's going through a lot. He's been put through the ringer in this trilogy. So we still have all of those kinds of the tropes of like the tortured protagonist, the tortured policeman, which you're looking for in this kind of work. But then all of those Golden Age influences, and I love just being able to have both of those things in one book. It's very satisfying.
Yes, thank you. And things will only get worse for Helgi in the third book, I'm saying.
I was afraid of that.
I pretty much wrote the second and the third book almost back to back because I wanted the series to be, it's pretty much like one book, one book split into three. So it just keeps going right off where the second one left off. And you can even maybe, if you look carefully, you might even find clues in book number 2 to the solution in book number 3.
Ooh. Okay. Yes, it truly is, propulsive. And I think that's something that you hear a lot about your writing, which also is very Christie-ish. I mean, no one keeps those pages turning like Agatha Christie, but I certainly felt that way reading this book. I think I read it in 2 sittings.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, because I just couldn't, I got into that sort of inhale kind of thing. You're like, nope, I need to finish this, which is, it's the joy of reading a good mystery. I'm curious if you have a favorite Agatha Christie. You told us what your, I love, by the way, that your first was Evil Under the Sun, because that's often the one that I recommend to people as their first Poirot. I just think it's a really excellent introduction to Poirot. But I'm curious if you have one that you could identify as your favorite.
Yes, what I'm usually, when I'm asked this question, I usually say Murder on the Links, because...
Really?
Yes, for many reasons. One of the reasons is that I told you earlier, I used to go with my father to this National Library and read these old Christies in a very fantastic setting, like almost like an adventurous setting for a young boy in a big library with big desks and old books with the smell of old books in the air. And so that was one of the books that I read there. So it has a very strong memory for me just reading this book originally in a lovely setting. And I think that helps. But I just love it's an early Poirot. It has Hastings, and it's a playful book in a way. It's cleverly plotted, exotic. I mean, it's set in France. Yeah, I just love that book. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the best Christie, but I love it.
And that's, which is such a good answer for what your favorite Christie is, because I think so many of us, we have our, what is, your quote unquote top ranked Christie, where you're like, this is, or the ones that you feel like are the best, but often the one that's your personal favorite is actually very different. So I don't know if anyone has ever said The Murder on the Links, but I love that answer because of that. Give that book a little bit of love. And then I'm going to make you choose, as I do everyone who comes on this podcast, the age-old question. Gun to your head, is it going to be Poirot or Marple?
Well, Tommy and Tuppence then.
You're going to choose Tommy and Tuppence over Poirot and Marple?
No. I love Tommy and Tuppence, and I think they're very underrated, but I would go for Poirot. I mean, there's just more books with Poirot. They're both iconic, but I did a lot of Poirot in translation when I was going through these 14 books. I sort of, once I'd done Endless Night, I started leaning towards the untranslated Poirot books. So I tried to get through as many of those as I could. So he is a firm favorite, I think.
All right. Well, coming from one who's translated many of the Poirot books, I suppose I will have to accept Poirot as an answer, even though, as everyone listening to this podcast knows, I am a Marpleite. Well, this has been a pleasure speaking with you. And I've really been looking forward to having you on the podcast for a while because it's, been quite obvious to me what a huge Agatha Christie scholar you are, in addition to all of the wonderful mysteries that you're putting out there in the world that have that Agatha Christie influence to them. So I've been missing your presence on this podcast actually for at least a couple of years, from like, I've got to have Ragnar on this podcast, and I'm glad that it finally happened. And I'm going to include a link to your website and to this latest book. But, as we've discussed, you obviously have so much out there, which I think many listeners will really enjoy. So I encourage people to check them out. And yeah, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today.
No, it's been so much fun. And, I can talk about Agatha Christie for forever and ever.
Yes. And, give us enough Agatha Christie festivals to attend together, and we will probably do just that.
Yes.
So, all right. Thank you, Ragnar.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Ragnar Jónasson for speaking with me. I had such a good time geeking out over Christie. He is a true fan. He brings the receipts to his Christie fandom. As I mentioned, I have linked to his website in the show notes, so feel free to take a look if you haven't read any of his work and you'd like to check out any of his titles, in particular, those more recent Golden Age inspired ones, or more obviously Golden Age inspired ones, I should say. For next week's episode, I am actually going to be bringing you a holiday special, hooray, which is a rerun, boo, or maybe hooray. At this point in the podcast's nearly 10-year history, I have banked a lot of holiday-themed episodes, so I've got some holiday goodies to share with you, and so much more to come in the new year, in 2026. All About Agatha continues strong. And I'm so grateful for that. It is due in no small part to all of you, your support, your encouragement of what I'm doing here and over on Patreon. Speaking of, my latest Patreon episode is a Christmas-themed examination of Dorothy L. Sayers. I review 2 Lord Peter Wimsey Christmas short stories of hers. They are both a lot of fun, very interesting. Check out the link to Patreon in the show notes. And of course, you can always email me at allaboutthedame@gmail.com, or find the podcast on Instagram at allaboutagatha. And you can find me at my author website, kemperdonovan.com. Links to all of that in the show notes. And I end these episodes the same way every time, because it really is important to encourage people to rate and or review the show. It helps me expand its reach. And I just love meeting folks like you, so help me continue to do that by giving the show a rating or a review. So many of you have done it, but so many of you have not. So consider that my Christmas gift. Thank you in advance, and I'll see you next time. Bye.